Hey guys and girls, thanks for being patient with me with this most recent video. Turns out I had a lot of stuff going on and I kind of put it on the back burner and it came back to bite me. So if you didn't get to see this right away because you tried and it wasn't there, my apologies. I'll try and be on time, more better next time. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about the next step in this process. It's the design brief. You might be saying to yourself, well, where is this in the process, Mr. Connors? Well, we're going to be moving into the very last part of the inquiring and analyzing phase. You might see it up there in the top right hand corner of the last blue section. It's called developing a design brief. Alright, so what is a design brief? This is going to be your opportunity. Well, a design brief is, according to IB, a summary of the analysis of relevant research. And that sounds really wordy. I don't doubt most of you can figure it out. 9th and 10th grade, you should know it. What I would convert that into for 6th grade language would be the most important things that you learned about a subject or a topic that is going to help you solve the problem. So in this case, what would be some of the information that you'd want to do research into? Maybe the logistics of the challenge that we have. Like, what are the specific details that Mr. Connor needs to let you know? Like, what are the due dates and what materials are we going to be given, and what kind of tools we'll be able to use. Logistical questions are only questions that I'm the only one who can answer, and they're specific just to this unit. Maybe you need to do some research into transportation vehicles or the parts of transportation vehicles. You've actually started to do a little bit of this with your market analysis. Maybe you need to do a little bit of research into simple machines, right? Specifically wheel and axle, how they work together, how to make the most possible efficient wheel and axle you can. Maybe you need to do some research into potential energy and kinetic energy. What are they? How do they work together? What's going to be the best way for us to store our potential energy so it can be released as kinetic energy? And maybe you need to do a little bit of research into the landscape of Mars. What is it like? What are some of the things that you might encounter? Once you've done all this research, then we got to pull it together in a design brief. So you ask yourself, okay, well, I have questions. I put them in my research plan. Where am I going to find all these answers? Well, just so you know, there are two main types of research that you can conduct. One is primary research. That's where you get it firsthand directly from the source. And the second is secondary secondary sources. That's kind of like second-hand information. Somebody already found out all the information that you want, and you're getting it from them. There are lots of ways you can get this. For example, under primary sources, you can do interviews with an expert. Maybe I'm an expert when it comes to the logistics of this challenge. Am I an expert on Mars? No. A NASA engineer would be an expert on Mars, but get the experts that you can. Maybe you do a little bit of actual experimentation yourself. Maybe you build something, you try something out, and you kind of take in that data on your own from your first-hand experience with that. Or maybe you go right to the manual. In our case, we don't have a manual on how to build a Mars rover, but if we were trying to do research into how to use a particular software, well, that manual might come in handy. Types of secondary research are things like books, right? We have a library here on campus, so you could go directly to that library and see if you can find the answers to some of your questions. Maybe you could read a magazine like Popular Science or something that's related to the topic of content that you're trying to find out about. You could look for newspaper articles, or yes, you could always search the internet, which includes things like going to specific websites like NASA's website or Time or Nat Geo for Kids, or going to YouTube and watching YouTube videos that are specific to the content of what you're trying to find your answers to. All those would be valid forms of secondary research. So what do you do when you actually find your answers? Well, you should obviously take notes on that. Write down the things that you find are most relevant and most useful. Then you should probably go to another source and find some additional answers, and hopefully those things corroborate. In fact, you're going to want to organize all your information together in topics, and then within those topics, you're going to want to make sure that they match up so that everything there is valid. If you find that 3 sources say one thing and a 4th source says something completely different, maybe that 4th source isn't completely valid. Then, once you've got all the information, you need to summarize it. So I don't want to hear everything you found out, just a summary of the most important things. Let's say you found out 10 pieces of information. Well, for this purpose, for what we're doing, I don't need to know everything, but maybe the most 2 or 3 most important primary best things that you think are going to help you to solve our problem, that are going to help you build the best possible rover. The reason why we're doing this is because in class, you're going to be putting together a design brief based around a couple of questions, like what have you learned about this challenge that you didn't know before? Those would be your logistics-based questions. You might need to interview me to get those answers. Questions about simple machines, how do they work? What's the best way to use them? How do we make the best possible simple machines? How do people use them? Questions about potential energy. I need to see some evidence that you know what potential energy is and how we might use it ourselves, as well as kinetic energy. I'm hoping that you'll also be able to tell me about transport vehicles, specifically some of the features and characteristics that you saw when you were doing your market analysis that you think would work well for yours. Maybe you'll be able to tell me a little bit about the terrain and landscape of Mars, so we know sort of what it's going to be like once we get our rovers there. And then the final thing you're going to tell me is how all of this knowledge together is going to help you meet the design challenge. So when you come to class tomorrow, you're going to have to start doing this research using primary and secondary resources. Okay, now, one other thing that you need to be aware of. Whenever we do research, we need to make sure that we avoid plagiarism by giving, credit to whoever came up with that information previous to us. And there are a couple ways to do this. You could summarize, you could quote, or you could paraphrase. In our case, we're going to focus on summarizing, which means you have to write the text in your own words. You're not going to be copying and pasting from anywhere else. And you need to give some reference to where that information came from, right? So, I suggest that we always start by using the words according to, then listing out who is the source of that information, and then what you learned. So, according to Mr. Connors, you found out it's okay to summarize in his YouTube video that you watched before class. That would be a totally appropriate way to ensure that if you had used that information, it was your information. It was appropriate because you gave reference to where you got that information from. I would also suggest that maybe just to cover yourself, go ahead and provide me a hyperlink or a link back to where that information came from. That way, I can verify it when I go and read through your document. If you said that you got this information from a particular YouTube video, well, link the video for me so I can click on it and get access to it. All right, I will see you in class where we're going to go through the process of starting some research, getting our ideas down, summarizing them, providing where we got the information from so we can have a valid design brief. Whew. See you guys in class. Aloha.